to bring me happy. Ooh. Thank you, happy.
Lily and I are back for a double dose of a doozy interview this week as we continue part 2 with Star Trek science consultant and writer André Bormanis.
Yes, it's been a good one to the point where we need to literally show you how science is sometimes surreptitiously slipped into Star Trek.
Sneaky science consulting as a science fact within science fiction, eh, Lily?
Ooh, yes, you're correct, okay? Please stack our hands as we demonstrate.
Okay.
Like our layered hands here, there's layers of confinement in science fact mixed into science fiction that these scripted stories of Star Trek eliciting producers to draw out of the layers of entertainment.
Ah, I see. And these 5 fingers on our hands within the stack represent the anatomically correct layers within science fact, I guess working artistically, right? And making that synergy to make a plausible story. Eh?
Said like a true producer, but yes, exactly. When you break down the musculoskeletal system of a hand, it's basically just a bunch of pulleys and levers. It's really a phenomenal way of taking a mechanical system and optimizing it, but looking at this through a layer of stories and showcasing one thing like a science fact, then adding a science fiction plus a stunt to grab someone's attention.
Ah, you got me, but sold this layer of fact and fiction with maybe a stunt. I guess, is that a stunt coming out of the story? You know, there's multiple episodes of Star Trek, and how the science works within it is amazing. And I can understand your analogy here with the layers.
It is, yes, but I hope you didn't take offense to the smack.
No.
Stands for a stunt in our layered story of Star Trek science.
It's heartfelt. I'm good. Thank you.
I hope so, because that is mild in comparison to your Doc Dog Klingon knife to my throat.
Oh, that's right.
Previously seen here on A Captain's Log. And you have the next question as we resume our interview with the man behind the science in Trek. You have the floor.
Now, André, you're also there in 1995 at the very beginning of Star Trek Voyager, and through its entire series run, you were also a science consultant. I read in an article from an August 1997 article written for the Washington Post by Dan Vergano. This is the newspaper talking about Parallax, that Voyager 3rd season episode where the story needed a particle beam, and you in particular would look at what does the story prescribe the right kind of particle beam in the case of the cracked event horizon particularly. Now, take us through the step-by-step process on how you approach this on a science level.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it has been a while. It's crazy how long it's been. But at any rate, yeah, you know, the tricky part about that episode Parallax is somebody pitched a story where Voyager is kind of like a submarine trapped under the ice at the North Pole. Mm-hmm. Of course, we're in interstellar space, and the idea was that, oh, what if Voyager were trapped inside the event horizon of a black hole? The event horizon of a black hole is not a physical thing. It's only a boundary in the sense that what happens at the event horizon of a black hole is nothing special, except that if you happen to be in a ship or in a spacesuit or whatever, and you cross that event horizon, there's no way in hell you're ever getting back to the outside universe, right? Because once you cross that invisible boundary, the escape velocity from the singularity at the heart of the black hole is greater than the speed of light. And you can never achieve that speed in the real universe. So you are stuck, right? It's a great metaphor, but again, it's not a physical thing. The difference between the spaceships that we can build today and the Starship Voyager, of course, is that Voyager has warp drive. I would go with one of our fictional particles, fictitious particles, like the nadions and the phaser beams and verterons and other things that we and the writers and Rick Sternbach and Mike Okuda had invented on some of the episodes prior to me arriving there, just to make sure that we weren't saying something about, say, a beam of protons, that a real physicist who is, say, a particle physicist and who knows these things inside and out would say, oh, that's, you know, they don't have that property. That's not going to work, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we might have had to do something like that in Parallax. But the notion, that we could get a signal potentially, a subspace signal because of the way that time dilation works. There's an episode where Data meets the woman who was married to Dr. Noonien Singh, his creator, and who kind of thinks of herself as his mother in some way. I think it was called
Inheritance.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, in that episode, we had a planet that was trying to avert this catastrophic cooling of its core. Well, this is a Class M planet, something like the Earth, 8,000 miles in diameter, had a big, molten metal core, iron, nickel, other things probably, that was a few thousand miles in diameter, and it was cooling at a rapid rate for whatever reason. And this was triggering earthquakes and volcanic activity, all valid. That's, I think those things would happen if the core of our planet started to rapidly cool for some unknown reason. It's part of plate tectonics, it's part of what drives it is those internal temperatures, right? At any rate, Enterprise was charged with coming up with a plan to try to reheat the core of this planet to prevent this catastrophe. Well, the core of a planet is a big, dense thing, and as powerful as the Starship Enterprise is, it's a tiny little thing compared to the size of the core of this planet. How is this going to happen? Well, again, I invoked another fictitious particle. I think Mike Okuda and Rick Sternbach, the technical consultants and artists on the show who, designed a lot of the spaceships and the computer displays and so forth, they had come up with the nation particle, I think, for the phasers, because phasers are particle beam weapons. And I thought, okay, we're going to establish in this episode that one of the properties of these nation particles is that if you inject them into the core of a Class M planet, or any mass of iron and nickel and whatever else might be in there, that it can trigger a runaway chain reaction that would generate a great deal of heat.
Speaking for all science lovers, we really appreciate the hard work that goes into making Star Trek as realistic as possible to the world we know today. Bryan and I tried to imagine how difficult it is via our hands in layers of story complexities to apply real science to completely made up scenarios.
That's pretty impressive.
Our writers, we had really good writers, really smart people, very, very little technical background necessarily, but they were very curious about science. They did a lot of reading in science, they were science literate, even though they might have been English majors or theater arts or whatever, in college, but they understood, the difference between science fiction and fantasy. They wouldn't have let me get away with some kind of Lost in Space, sort of gimmick to explain something that we're trying to tell the audience is scientifically credible. So I was always happy to work with them, and I was always impressed by the amount of imagination that they had and brought into those stories, and the logic, and the way that they would think and extrapolate, which is what all good scientists do, right? It's a creative endeavor when you're trying to really push back the frontier.
A Captain's Log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to A Captain's Log. We're thrilled that you've returned for the second half of our interview with André Bormanis. Now, André is Star Trek's physicist and science consultant who's also a talented writer. Now, Lili, let's set up this quick recap of the Voyager episode titled Waking Moments. Now, this one was written by André Bormanis, as is kind of a refresher for our viewers. Lili, the floor is yours, if you please.
Certainly, Bryan. Okay. So in this episode, Tom Paris's shuttle malfunctions and he crashes into a planet. Tuvok forgets to put his uniform on and arrives naked on the Voyager bridge with the senior staff laughing at him. Captain Janeway walks into a dark mess hall only to discover that her crew is sitting at a table dead because she didn't get them home in time, and Harry Kim dreams that Seven of Nine tries to seduce him in a Jeffries tube. Essentially, Robert Beltran's Commander Chakotay finds this dream alien in a hiding place played by actor Mark Coulson, who is a person from a race that, when asleep, exists as combined figments of their own and other people's dreams.
That's pretty cool.
Now you may make it so with your question.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Lils. So, André, please talk about this very first episode that you wrote completely on your own, doing the story and script for the Voyager episode titled Waking Moments, as Lili referred to. Now, in season 4, I read that Kenneth Biller, the story editor, helped you a lot. Now, typically, the science advisor's involvement begins with the story treatment. Since you're fully writing the episode yourself, did you take a scientific approach on this episode first before pitching the story to executive producer Jeri Taylor and her leading the writer's room team?
It wasn't so much of a scientific approach as it was something that was simply based on my own experience. And I remember coming up with an idea for Voyager, and I thought that since, Chakotay is Native American and a lot of the literature about lucid dreaming is Carlos Castaneda and ancient, Indian cultures, Native American cultures in the Americas and so forth. And there's a religious significance to it, where the shamans would do these things. And I thought, well, that might be an interesting element of Chakotay's backstory. And if there was a way to build a Chakotay story around that, maybe that'd be cool for that character, right? So I came up with this idea of an alien race that believes that the dream time, when we're asleep and dreaming, is reality. And when we're awake and not dreaming, that's the false world. And that they recognize that most species, kind of operated as if the false world were the real world. And they felt very vulnerable when they were in their dream states because they knew that, they could potentially be attacked or, because they're asleep, they're defenseless, right? Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the initial pitch. And Ken, who's just great writer, was given the assignment of, let's fix this. And he moved some things around. He added a couple of elements, and it's like, I see. Now it's it's working, Mm-hmm. And whatever things that I did that weren't working, he fixed them. And that was one of the things Ken was very good at. And of course, he's gone on to do a lot of other shows and has been very successful. So.
Wow, this lucid dream stuff sounds interesting. How do I know I'm not lucid dreaming right now?
Because you're not dreaming.
Okay. I guess I'm not.
You're serving as ambassador to the Star Trek fans, and we're live in a studio in Pasadena, California right now.
Okay. I see, this is why I need you here on set. Keeping me awake, Lily. Okay, I'm awake. Let's move to the next question with Andre. So Andre, as many of us know, a writer's vision gets changed and bounced around from short treatment to pitch and then onto the writer's room, and even producers change things sometimes before they go into the final rewrites on the Paramount sound stages in Hollywood. Now, please tell us about one of your favorite moments in writing an episode of Star Trek Enterprise, one of your favorite series with Scott Bakula, Linda Park, Connor Trinaire, and Jolene Blalock. Tell us about this scene and how it was delivered to the perfection by these actors on screen, if you can recall. I know it's been a while, back in the early 2000s.
We did, I think, 98 or 99 episodes of Star Trek Enterprise. You count the pilot as 2 episodes. I think it's 99. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Starting over 20 years ago, 2001. And I think I was involved in the story breaks for all but 2 of those episodes. So wow. 96 episodes. Things change so much, so frequently, that it is very hard for me to just think back and keep track. And I remember writing something called Desert Crossing. We're always trying to, the great thing about Enterprise and the thing that worked so well, even though a lot of people were, I think, initially put off by this, is that, for Captain Kirk or Captain Janeway or Sisko or Picard, beaming down on a Class M planet that had never been explored by humans before was just another day at the office. Right. For our crew on Enterprise, it was a brand new, unbelievable experience every time, right? They weren't seasoned space explorers. And they were more, Kirk and Picard and that gang, they're so heroic. They're unfazed by even the most, extraordinary events. Now, not always true. Obviously, Kirk was deeply, hurt when Edith Keeler died. Picard was tortured by the Cardassians,
Yes.
The Borg, they had these experiences that were scarring, but typically, the next week they're kind of back to who they were, right?
Right.
We wanted to try to make those characters, I think, a little more relatable by being, less than superheroes in that sense, which was, I think, my second episode in season 1. And Clancy Brown was the guest star. There was a very fun scene with Clancy and Scott and Connor that I remember writing. I might have been working on that with Brannon Braga. When we had this dinner scene, and we at this moment where Archer and Trip were, finally realized what they were eating, which was some animal testicle or something like that, and they're just kind of like, I think that was fun, and those, we had a great cast. Connor and Scott were great. They were great in that scene. I remember moments like that, and Scott was very good, I think, at really kind of showing his humanity and his vulnerability. And I think in some cases that made him maybe look a little indecisive. And some people thought, oh, well, he's, he should be stronger like Kirk, he shouldn't have any doubts. And it's like, well, come on, is that realistic? Certainly in that first season, we really wanted to make it like, suppose you and me, Bryan and Andre, got on a starship and we were whisked off to other parts of the galaxy, right? Initially, we'd be thrilled. And then secondarily, we would be, I will speak for myself. I would be scared, whatless.
I think you're speaking for all of us.
Yes, for sure.
I would be cowering in the, in the bathroom of the captain's quarters or wherever I could go that somebody would probably not find me.
The model for television was changing, and Paramount was noble for trying to air on these low-end broadcast TV channels that were non-network channels. Very different. Eventually, though, having Paramount Plus and streaming to bring better viewership numbers for Star Trek Voyager, Discovery, all the reruns was good via streaming versus the painful pose of antennas trying to, find a signal. Oh, there it is, the signal!
Interesting on the changing state of television as an industry.
For sure.
So this begs the question based upon Bryan's perspective and my interest in Star Trek's progression in this UPN network and eventually streaming. What's your take on all this, Andre?
I have to believe that, back then, I mean, most people were still watching TV with, with intercepting a signal with an antenna.
Yeah, exactly.
And, HD was starting to, I forget when HD really started to take off, but that was also coming through an antenna initially. Mm-hmm. And then later cable, right? And now, of course, well, you can still buy an HD antenna for your TV. I don't know if you can get a 4K antenna.
Andre, you made quite a few cameos on the Star Trek series over the years. Your name was referenced on screen 2 times as A. Bormanis in Enterprise and André Bormanis, Starfleet in Star Trek Voyager prior. Now, the big one on screen shows you in a suit in the final episode of the Enterprise. These are the Voyagers. Tell us about this on-screen cameo and working among the Enterprise production crew, but you're actually on camera.
So yeah, we occasionally got to do those things. I think Manny played an admiral, so they made him a uniform. They wanted me to be some generic dignitary, whatever that means. Mm-hmm. They just put me in this gray suit with a tie, and it was fairly, it was cut a little bit different maybe than what was in style at that time. And then they just, told us where to sit and where to look. And somehow I ended up in a seat. And the camera was pushing into the crowd, and I was in the frame the whole time. In retrospect, I worked on Star Trek for 12 consecutive seasons, 12 years.
Amazing. That is amazing.
Mostly, science consultant freelance writer on Voyager, and writer and eventually co-producer on Enterprise. And I've never had such a long run since. Until the Orville, I'd never been on a show since Star Trek that lasted more than 1 season.
Andre, for your work on Star Trek Enterprise, you wore many hats moving up the ranks of the writing team. I understand you were brought aboard as a staff writer and also story editor and ultimately co-producer. Talk about this ascent to co-producer and what this entailed. Plus, if you can discuss the challenge of meeting the requirements of helping create approximately 26 episodes per season.
Yeah, those different titles, I always think of them a little like ranks in the military, a staff writer is an ensign, a story editor is a lieutenant, executive story editor is lieutenant commander. Those titles typically just mean that you're getting paid a little more money per episode to do the same work. And once you're in the producer sort of ranks, then you might be more involved in brainstorming season arcs and character arcs, the overarching themes of the show. You'll probably get pulled into more, production meetings and budget meetings and so on and so forth. Depends on the show. Basically, it's the same job. You're coming up with stories, you're breaking stories, you're writing scripts. You're trying to figure out if you can make the script that you've written for the amount of money that's available to make it. And if not, what are you going to cut? What are you going to change? I was involved in more production meetings, as I was becoming a, co-producer, producer, so forth. Would get involved in casting sometimes.
Oh, really? Oh.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Some shows, they will do that with writers from the beginning, even if they're staff writers, which is probably a good thing. Although I think for a lot of people, it's overwhelming enough to be to be responsible for writing scripts and doing story breaks. Most commonly, you kind of gradually work your way into those other roles. But, the way things have changed now, there are so many shows that it's like you have a mini room for 6 episodes and maybe you produce 6 scripts over the course of 4 or 5 months. And then they may not decide to pick up the show.
Oh, wow.
So you get paid for the script, but then you never get to see your script made and you never get to be on set and you never get to interact with directors and editors. And, it's not a good situation. Being a writer, it's kind of an apprenticeship program in a lot of ways. And, the more experience you have, the better you become at the job. But the basic job is still writing a good script and learning all of these other elements of production and being involved in, casting and editing and whatever else, goes into making a show. It makes you a better writer in the long run. So, and yeah, the pressure of, we did first 2 seasons of Enterprise and all seasons of the other shows. We did 26 episodes a year. And that's a lot of pressure because, when I walked into Brannon's office, my first season on Star Trek Enterprise, I think we might have started the writer's room in April or thereabouts. And we were going to start shooting end of June, beginning of July, something like that. Brannon had these, big dry erase calendars on, 3 out of the 4 walls of his office for 1 calendar for every month. And before we started writing Word 1, the date that every one of those 26 episodes was supposed to start shooting was already on those calendars. Really? And so we knew that, by November 13th, episode 14 was going to start shooting, and we had to have that script ready, ideally ready a week and a half earlier than that for pre-production,
Yeah.
And you look at that calendar and it's like, you just got to take it a day at a time, because if you think about that whole span of the season, you'll drive yourself crazy. Sure. We were lucky if we had, 3 or 4 scripts in good shape, kind of ready to go by the time the first one started shooting.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And then we were just, we might have had a few stories beyond that, depends. But then we're just, we just keep chugging forward and we're writing ahead of the deadlines. And then we have a couple of weeks at Christmas to catch up, because we shut down for 2 weeks at Christmas. So that buys us a little time with, usually a pretty crucial point in the season. We didn't work through the holidays necessarily, but a couple of us would typically be off on a script assignment during the holidays, to get scripts done. Certainly Brannon and Rick would, not really stop working much at all during those breaks because, they were responsible for, the final product. Yeah, it was a lot of pressure. And the harder part, though, is it's not so much the scripts as the stories, because there were any number of times when I was in the writer's room on Enterprise and where somebody comes up with a pitch. It's, oh, wow, oh, that would be so amazing. Oh, yeah, and we could do this and do that and do that. That would be great. Okay, start writing it, and then somebody would say, oh, wait a minute. Wasn't that episode 121 of Next Generation?
Oh.
Not an episode back in the 5th season where they did this sort of thing, and it was like you're right. So, coming up with those original stories, that was the more challenging part. We had a lot of really good, seasoned, experienced writers on the staff, some new writers, some, mid-level, some very experienced writers. Once we had a story figured out, writing the script, the characters, the story, writing the scenes and the dialogue, that's the easier part of the process. It is for me anyway. Some people may find that a little more challenging. I don't know, but it's really coming up with those original stories. That's the hard part. And again, if you think, if you go in there and you think, God, we've got to come up with 26 cities, how are we going to do that? Well, you just brainstorm,
Yeah.
and you keep moving forward. And there was always some subset of the writers, writing staff that was, focused on developing stories. If you had maybe 8 or 9 people on the staff, once, the ball gets rolling and somebody is sent off to do the, script number 1, or maybe, Rick and Brannon may have written something over the break and that's going to be script number 1, or it's going to be a 2-parter or something. Well, then, okay, well, now let's talk about episode 3, And then once you figure out that story, some writer's going to go off and do the script, and they'll have 2 weeks maybe to write that first draft teleplay. And the rest of the staff starts working on episode 4. And then somebody goes off to do episode 4. And if the guy doing episode 3 is still working, well, then it's, one less person to figure out episode 5. But those people are now figuring out episode 5, right? So
now this process involves an enormous team, and you've painted the picture for us from a production perspective inside the hive mind of the proverbial Borg Collective cube. Oh. Now, members of the writing staff move to the next episode, like while you're still producing this one. Talk about your vision for a career after graduating from college and then being asked to be involved on Paramount for the Star Trek series. Maybe you could wrap up the interview with talking about this, as we hope you liked talking about Star Trek. So we're looking forward, or possibly backward in this case for you.
I like talking about it. I don't get to talk about it that often anymore. And,
Oh, man,
it's fun to take that walk back down memory lane, because it really was, it was a great time. It was an amazing experience. I did it, like I said, for 12 years, and, never would have expected, when I was certainly not when I was in high school or college or even after college, that this would be a thing that I could potentially someday do, or that I would do it. Even when Next Generation came on the air, I didn't think I'd have anything to do with that other than just watching it like a regular fan,
André Bormanis, thank you for being with Lili and I here on A Captain's Log. I know we've both enjoyed this half hour with you boldly going
where no one has gone before.
Hello, happy, my old friend. I'm glad you've manifested yourself into a human I can depend on to bring me happy.